You have just entered into the enigma that is The Right to Reason, episode 20. I'm Robert Stanley, and I did not let you down. You expected something special for our 20th episode, and baby, Daddy came through. I am very excited to have Dr. Michael Shermer here today, founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine and author of multiple New York Times bestsellers such as The Moral Arc. We're going to dig into one of my favorite topics. Do we have free will? Does free will exist? Shermer specializes in this very topic, and I have a feeling that he's about to melt your brains like a gray matter grilled cheese. But don't get nervous. I'm going to be standing smack dab between Dr. Shermer and your gentle, soft nervous tissue. Daddy's going to keep you safe. Let's go.
And let me assure you that we are going to take our fight for economic justice, for social justice, for environmental sanity, for a world of peace.
And I think it should be, religion, treated with ridicule and hatred and contempt. And I claim that right.
The cosmos is also within us. We're made of star stuff. We are a way for the cosmos to know itself.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
Before we talk to Michael Shermer, we're going to have a little fun with my friend Zack Law. You might remember him from a previous episode. He's the host of the Zackrilege Cast, and he's going to enter into the Thunderdome with your host today by testing his brain power with atheist trivia. Let's see if our buddy has what it takes, and then we'll ask Michael Shermer a frightening question. Is artificial intelligence an existential threat to humanity? He's also going to talk to us about the secret hidden flaw of the scientific underbelly. What is wrong with science itself? Other topics today include, is it possible to be too skeptical? Does the self exist? His ideas about the conceptual penis, his new book, Heavens on Earth, the scientific research for the afterlife, immortality, and utopia. And of course, he's going to have to answer the big question, does free will exist? All that happens right now.
Culture is not your friend. Culture is for other people's convenience and the convenience of various institutions, churches, companies.
We very naturally, as a cognitive and behavioral imperative, we form descriptions of the world and we try to figure out what's going on.
If you base the design of rockets on science, they reach the moon. It works. Bitches.
All right, and it's time for Atheist Trivia with Zack Law from the Zackrilege Cast. Zack, happy to have you on the show. How's your show been doing lately, man?
Well, unfortunately, I had to take a week off, but other than that, we've been going pretty strong this year. I think I've missed 1 week out of the year or two, but yeah.
Been kicking butt out there. I loved your Fitzgerald discussion. I thought that was a really fascinating show.
I almost forgot I did that. He's just so smooth. You could talk, I think I did the shortest interview with him ever, and it was 75 minutes. He's good.
So you feeling smart today? You ready for...
Oh boy. Yeah, well, no, but you can, make it sound good.
Atheist trivia. And actually, these trivia questions look really easy, so but you have to, it's only 10 questions. You have to get 100%, or else you are just a shitty atheist.
I mean,
you go to atheist hell if you get this wrong.
I could go against the grain here. I feel it.
All right, question number 1 for Zack Law. Is atheism a religion, yes or no?
No.
Atheism can be broken down into 2 positions. What are they? Black atheism and white atheism.
Okay, that could be a thing. That'd be a fun podcast topic.
That would be a good topic. Strong atheism and weak atheism, left atheism and right atheism, light atheism and heavy atheism. I think you should go with black or white atheism.
Are those things? I have no idea.
Yeah, those are things, man. All right, we'll just pick one.
I'll go left and right then.
All right. You answered wrong. Number 3, arguments for the
what's the right answer? Leave me hanging, man.
We get the answers at the end.
Oh, God.
There's a system here, Zachary.
Okay, save it up.
Number 3, arguments for the non-existence of God are called atheological arguments. Which of the following is not the name of an atheological argument? Argument from incoherence, argument from physical minds, argument from evil, or argument from free thought? Which of those is not an atheological argument?
I shouldn't have had like a beer and a half before doing this interview. I have, like, you're doing the double negative thing, so I don't even know which direction I'm supposed to go. So I'll do what I did in the SAT and go for C. What was C?
Argument from evil. There are no atheists in foxholes, true or false?
False.
All atheists are motivated by hatred toward religion and religious people, true or false?
False. What the hell is that?
I don't know. All right, here's a big question. Number 6. In 1963, Madeleine Murray was the plaintiff in a landmark Supreme Court case which helped end the unconstitutional practice of forced prayer and coercive Bible recitation in the public schools of America. What was the name of the case? Hint, here's a good hint. It was combined with a similar case, Abington Township v. Shemp, and they were decided together. Murray v. David, Murray v. Curlett, Murray v. Anderson, or Murray v. Johnson.
I even saw that really crappy Netflix movie about her.
Yeah, I watched that too.
But I don't remember.
It wasn't a good movie, but I thought it was interesting. I didn't know that she was murdered by one of her employees. I never knew that. Like, I knew her name. I knew who she was.
I heard the story. I'm thinking, this is going to be a great movie. And it turned to be a really bad movie.
Yeah, it wasn't.
And then it sounds like they mischaracterized a lot of the characters. Did I win? Did I get a prize or no?
Well, we've only done 6, but I'm going to pick for you on the last
for that question.
I picked Johnson, because I just figured that's where you would go.
Well, that's what I selected, yeah.
Atheism is communistic, liberal, socialistic, non-political.
Non-political.
Number 8. What book written by George Smith is believed to be one of the world's most popular books on atheism? Atheism, The Case Against God, God and the Burden of Proof, Atheism, A Philosophical Justification, or Losing Faith in Faith, From Preacher to Atheist. Actually, that last one, From Preacher to Atheist, that's who is that? I know who that is. I just had him on the show.
Enthoven?
No, he's actually a really cool guy.
You know, we need to work on the whole
Jerry DeWitt.
atheist.
Jerry DeWitt. Just the last one's a book by Jerry DeWitt. Anyway, I'm guessing they're probably all real
training
books.
Or something, because like George Smith, that name, no idea who that is.
It sounds vaguely familiar, but you know it's one of the first 3.
Whatever A is, I'll go with that
all right,
one.
Atheism, The Case Against God. I think you're probably right on that. All right, let's see here. Number 9.
Great.
Who made the following? You're like, whatever the fuck that means. Thanks for your approval, Robert. All right. Who made the following statement? I'm an atheist, so there you go right there. I can't be elected to anything because polls all say that people won't elect an atheist. Ronald Reagan Jr., John William Carter, Chelsea Clinton, Julie Nixon.
Again, no clue, so Chelsea Clinton.
Oh, you know, it's Ronald Reagan Jr.
Okay.
Actually, I'm not supposed to be helping you with this, but I know it's him because
I already answered it wrong, so it's okay.
Because Ronald Reagan's son is.
I know he's an atheist.
Yeah, so it's got to be him. All right, number 10.
Last one. Clearly.
There has never been a picture of an atheist or agnostic on American currency. True or false? There has never been a picture of an atheist or agnostic on American currency.
Say false, just because I'm a,
false.
Contrarian.
All right, I'm submitting your answers.
There's
Let's see
a
what
lot
you got.
of currency,
All right, number 1, is atheism a religion? You were correct, it is not. Atheism can be broken down into 2 positions. You said left and right. You were wrong. It is weak and strong. Number 3.
What are those exactly?
Like, strong atheists is just saying, like, you know how, like, you and I would probably characterize ourselves as agnostic atheists. Like, we don't know there isn't a God, but we don't believe in a God, that kind of claim. Like, strong atheism would be like, I actually know there is no God. So strong atheism is the straw man that Christians always try to paint us with, where they say, like, you think you know there's no God? We're like, no, you can't prove a negative. What are you talking about?
You're as blindly certain as we are. That's bad. Wait.
So, I mean, technically, I guess by that false dichotomy of atheism, we would be a weak atheist if we had to.
It's just been a lot of
which sounds
left,
really
right
lame
talk lately, so I figured I'd throw that out there.
I could see where you went to. All right, number 3, arguments for the non-existence of God. Which one of these is not one? You said argument from evil. No, that's actually one of them. The one that was not.
He's making this up as he goes. Fake news. It's going to be 3 seconds.
So the answer was, theological arguments include arguments from confusion, atheistic cosmological argument, arguments from divine, hiddenness and non-belief, argument from evil, argument from evolution, arguments from incoherence. I just want you to know, when this is over, I'll have learned nothing. So. Yeah, that wasn't very helpful. There are no atheists in foxholes. You were correct that it was false. All atheists are motivated by hatred because they're total douchebags. False.
True.
You were correct. 1963, Madeline Marie
O'Hare.
Wasn't that her last name?
Yeah, she got married. She was taking that lead for everybody on Facebook. So yeah.
It was not Murray versus Johnson. It was versus Curlett. Atheism is non-political. You were right. You were right. Atheism, the Case Against God, was the George Smith book that apparently all atheists know, even though you and I did not know that. Who made the following statement? I can't be elected because I'm an atheist. That we were right. Well, I was right.
You already told me I was wrong.
Yeah, so. I was so happy that I knew the answer. The final question. There has never been a picture of an atheist or agnostic on American currency. You said false.
I did.
Are you ready to hear the result to question number 10?
Oh boy. No. Yes.
There has never been a picture of an atheist or agnostic on American currency.
That we know.
That answer
Andrew Jackson,
right after
total atheist.
This commercial break. No, it's false. You were right.
Oh.
No atheist has ever got.
Just not something I hear very often, being married. No.
So you got a 70, dude.
Woo!
You are not a good atheist.
That's like a C-. That's not bad.
The average score for this quiz on Google is a 60. So you did better than average.
Sweet.
But you know, it's kind of fun. We should do more of these. What are we going to call this segment?
Zach's last appearance on Right to Reason.
Anyway.
It'll take you you'll be really, really desperate before you call me back. I'm going, sorry, dude. I had to listen to my cat snore for 10 minutes and this.
So tell them about your show and how they can find you, man.
Zacrilege Cast, that's Zacrilege. Think sacrilege and do ZACH in front. There's a page on Facebook. You can go Zacrilege on Twitter. Try to do shows every week. Gonna have Michael from Reasonable Risk on next week. And I just interview people. I don't mess around with quizzes and whatever. Yes, and music and editing and
It's a good show. It's better than this segment was.
I have a microphone. That's good enough. I don't need to filter it through a yak's ass to make it sound professional like you professional people do. I talk.
I feel like you're talking shit about my show at this point.
I like drinking beer during the show. I like trying to ask crazy questions of people and have a good time with it. And sadly, atheists don't know ourselves very well, clearly, based on that quiz, and other people don't know us either.
That was a bullshit quiz.
Here's an introduction to us, and I try to get as wide a view of apparently mostly white men as possible on my show. I even had, a couple weeks ago a trans white man, sadly, it just can't get away from us. There's just so many of us.
You never had a black guest?
We're so awful. I think I've had a couple mixed race, but I need to get there's an really black brand, actually, Mandisa Thomas of Black Non-Believers is in my city, and I haven't had her on my show yet.
You sound so racist right now. Guys, just so you know, I know Zach is that.
I know, but look at my phone. I have a picture of that guy.
I really need to get a Chinese person. I want to get something darker skin than I am. I want to diversify. It's not coming off good, brother. Well, anyway, thanks for doing the trivia with us. Putting your ass on the line for the movement, brother.
I understand you, but I love you, so bye.
Hi everyone, Michael Shermer here. You have a right to reason, and you're listening to Robert Stanley's terrific podcast. Have a good day.
This is Blake Junta. I'm a Christian apologist, but I am glad you're here because you have the right to reason.
Hey, this is Dave Blair, rocking out to you, and you're listening to Right to Reason with Robert Stanley.
I ain't gotta do nothing. I just gotta pick myself up and move on.
How am I supposed to talk to you people if we don't believe the same thing?
But don't you see, you've already taken the first step, the hardest step. You're listening.
This is Jason Camo from A Lost State of Mind, and you're listening to The Right to Reason.
My daddy told me that I have the right to reason.
Today I am very happy to introduce our guest, Michael Shermer. Dr. Michael Shermer is the founding publisher of Skeptic Magazine, a monthly columnist for Scientific American, and a presidential fellow at Chapman University. He is the author of a number of New York Times best-selling books, including Why People Believe Weird Things, The Believing Brain, and The Moral Arc. His next book to be published, coming up this January, everybody, is Heavens on Earth, the scientific search for the afterlife, immortality, and utopia. Dr. Shermer, I'm really happy to have you here.
Oh, well, thanks for having me. I appreciate that and appreciate the kind words.
I want to ask you about your book coming up. Before we get to that, you recently released an article in your magazine, Skeptic, Is Artificial Intelligence an Existential Threat? In fact, that was the title of the article. So I wanted to ask you a particular question, very original question, just for me. Is artificial intelligence an existential threat?
No, I don't think so. There's been the reason we did that cover story with a number of different articles, and mine was the skeptical one, but we did have somebody who works in artificial intelligence who thinks it's potentially a threat, not a threat in the Terminator way where the machines turn evil, but in the more subtle, innocuous way where they just grow ever smarter to the point where they don't need us anymore, and it just sort of comes upon us without any evil intention on anybody's part. And before you know it, we're just, slaves to our overlords and computer overlords, and they'll have no use for us. So that's kind of the argument. This artificial general intelligence becoming super intelligence. And in my opinion, I've read all this stuff. John Brockman's Edge.org had a whole his annual question last year was on this very subject, and there's like 260 different opinions from leading scientists and scholars. So you can go there and check out all the different permutations of the argument and counter arguments. But in general, I think we tend to err on the side of being overly cautious about future technologies, and that in general it works out pretty well. And we get a hold of the negative aspects of the technologies, like atomic weapons, have never been used in war after the two droppings that ended World War II. That's a sign that that's the worst technology possible, and yet we've still managed to control that. And no, there's no guarantees. I mean, AI could be worse than atomic bombs, which is what Elon Musk thinks. And when people like Elon Musk and Bill Gates say we should be cautious, who am I to be skeptical of them? But on the other hand, there's plenty of people like Steve Pinker, for example, who's completely on my side on this, who's also a smart cookie. So, I think it isn't just the status of the people making the claims. It's, what are the arguments? And I think historically, in general, claims about existential threats of any kind, terrorism or nuclear weapons or whatever, never pan out. I mean, we're still here. So I think, and I do think it's going to happen slower than anybody thinks. I mean, I'm now 62, and I've been hearing about AI, when will computers achieve human level intelligence? Really since the 80s, it's been in the popular culture of people talking about it, when Marvin Minsky's book came out. that really launched the whole AI thing. This discussion has been around and nothing's happened. So of a threat, and I think these things take longer than we think, and we'll be able to get a control on it as necessary. Just like with self-driving cars. I mean, I'm not worried about it.
Right,
I think the government will issue the proper restrictions and licensing and controls that are appropriate. I think we'll have time to do that. And without it, being terribly disruptive in the same way that the horse and buggy industry was not, the people that worked in the horse and buggy industry, didn't all just go away and die when cars came in. They found something else to do. I think that the same kind of thing will happen with self-driving cars.
Well, in a moral debate, some jerk is going to bring up Hitler. I've seen a lot of your debates, and they always seem to go there. But
reductio ad Hitlerum, it's called.
Yeah, right. But in an AI discussion, somebody's going to bring up Sam Harris in this day and age, and I'm going to be that jerk. He had used an analogy where he was saying AI isn't going to know what we mean by something, or we won't have the ability to correct it whenever we say something like, well, I didn't mean that. So his analogy is, if I created an artificial intelligence and its job was to limit spam on my email list, and it had the ability to completely control, let's assume everything, for example, right? And this AI, would it not then meet its goal by saying people create spam, I will eliminate people? That's an oversimplified example of his analogy, but in that regard, I think that's kind of the fear of AI, is if we give it control, say we gave it control of the internet, it would learn exponentially so much faster than we would even know what it's doing. And I've heard Neil deGrasse Tyson respond to this by saying, well, you just unplug it. Yeah, but what if it became too intelligent to be unplugged before we realized it was intelligent enough to be unplugged?
Yeah, there was a Star Trek episode of the original series where M5, I think it was called, the computer that was running the Enterprise, and all of a sudden it took over and actually destroyed some other starships, and Kirk and Spock ran down to unplug it, and it zapped the, of course it didn't zap them, it zapped the underling in the red uniform. Because they always get zapped.
Yeah.
So, okay, fair enough. That's a decent argument. And, Sam's TED Talk on this, I think is really good. Sam, one of the things Sam does really well is direct conversations about important subjects, and this is an important subject. So yes, let's have the conversation by all means. But I think the counter arguments to, he's really reflecting Bostrom's book, Superintelligence. Bostrom is kind of the man on this. That book is sort of the articulation of all of that argument in a very thoughtful, detailed way. I mean, it's a heavy duty book. I listened to it on audio, and it was a difficult listen because, there's a lot of technical stuff in there. But if you can get through it, the arguments are pretty strong. But people have critiqued it on the other side, people that work in that business, people at Google, for example, and they would know. And again, I think the idea that, we're going to hand over the controls to AI, it doesn't really work that way. I mean, we're just integrating the technologies into our lives in such a gradual way that it would be obvious if there was a problem. Like if all of a sudden, instead of spam, it was deleting the emails you wanted to read, well, then you just have another algorithm that Google or Apple or whoever designs to prevent that from happening. You just keep making those kinds of adjustments. Google has a program they're working on, or maybe they're done now. They call it big red button, where, we'll hit the button before the world comes to an end because of AI. And I guess maybe there's a certain element of trust I have in the people that know what they're doing, that design these things. Maybe that's foolish. Yeah. I don't know.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah. So, there's as many, so you have Elon Musk and Bill Gates, Sam, a few others on that side, but you have Eric Schmidt, the CEO of Google. He says, nah, don't worry about it. We have it under control. Maybe that's famous last words. I don't know, but
maybe it's like when the Large Hadron Collider was about to begin testing, and everyone was worried. Well, what are you going to do? And they said, well, we're just trying to define or discover the God particle as predicted. Yeah. And everybody says the God particle, and the concern started growing and growing and growing. And then after they discovered the Higgs boson, everybody says, okay, we're fine, we'll move on. And maybe that's going to be the same with AI.
Well, that's a good analogy because before they turned on the Large Hadron Collider, there was a bunch of protesters and people that were shouting, this could be the end of the world. They're going to create a black hole inside there, and the black hole is going to start, consuming everything around it, including the LHC and then all of Switzerland and France, and then the entire globe, and it will be gone.
Yeah, I actually had a family member text me right after they had heard about the Large Hadron Collider and said that that's how we're going to bring demons into the world. And I thought, oh boy, I'm so glad I left religion. But anyway.
So what happened? Nothing happened. And I think, honestly, you're asking my opinion. No one knows for sure. So
sure.
I don't think we have anything to worry about. I think, AI will be our friend. Actually, I heard an interesting argument yesterday. There's a new TED Talk that was posted yesterday by Anil Seth. He's a cognitive scientist in England. And I forget what it's called, but if you go on, just Google him at TED.com. Anil Seth. It's on consciousness and what it means to be intelligent and alive and sentient and all that stuff. But in the middle there, he has a little sidebar about AI and why he's not worried about it, because it isn't intelligence that's the important thing that we should be thinking about. It's consciousness and life itself. That it's more than just being alive is more than being intelligent. That intelligence isn't everything. And anyway, so to watch that, he has an interesting little sidebar on there, and I thought, yeah, that's right. All our emotions and all the other aspects of our extended brain, our body, and extended intelligence or extended sentience to other people in society and so on. All that's also important.
Fascinating. Well, I'll look into that TED Talk. Speaking of TED Talks, you've done a couple yourself, and one of them that you did was on your book, Why People Believe Weird Things. You said science, and correct me if I'm wrong, I'm paraphrasing, but you said science has to track not just the hits, but the misses as well. And something that I worry about with science, what about the issue where failed experiments don't make for interesting articles or interesting studies, and therefore science itself may have a tendency to focus on the hits and maybe not all the misses, the same way that maybe a psychic would. So
yeah.
In that scenario, like, would you say that maybe there's these just tons of filing cabinets, in buildings all around the world that are just full of research that might disprove commonly held beliefs, but they never surface because possibly it was just boring?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, that the term is called the file drawer problem, where unsignificant results or failed experiments or whatever you want to call them just go in the file drawer and are never seen by the public or other scientists. And maybe those negative results are important. It's important to know what doesn't work or what doesn't happen. And so there is kind of a push, particularly in the social sciences, not only to have more replication, because that's also a problem. It's hard to replicate a lot of these experiments. So you wonder, what the peer reviewers were thinking, if they were thinking at all when they passed these articles on for publication. But also the encouragement of publishing negative results. I haven't followed this in the last year or two, so I'm not sure if anybody's followed up on it. But I actually thought about starting a journal. Well, there is a journal called the Journal of Irreproducible Results, but it's more of a humor magazine. But a serious one where you would just publish results that didn't happen. Like, we tested coffee and it had no effects on rats. Okay, well, that would be good to know. Or whatever. And, I agree. That's a potential problem in science. It's one reason why things change so much, because there'll be a single positive finding that gets published in Science or Nature, and the leading journals like Science and Nature, one of the reasons they're leading journals is because they really only publish original research and not replications, because replications are, boring. It's like, yes, we found out once again that M&Ms are reinforcers for little kids. Okay, well, that's not a earth-shaking finding. Or we found, yet another bone of Neanderthal dated to 300,000. Well, we already have hundreds of those. So, those kinds of findings just don't get published by the leading journals. So that's another problem. The lack of, the leading journals don't want to publish the replications. Therefore, if there's a non-replication, that is, somebody runs an experiment to try to replicate a leading journal article's claims, and they don't find anything, it's hard to get the leading journal to publish that article. You have to publish it somewhere else, or it doesn't get published at all. And I agree, that's a problem in science.
It's okay to be skeptical of the system of science itself. Would that be fair?
Oh yeah, absolutely, for sure. Yeah, we should be at every turn. We need to police ourselves, because if we don't do it, then the creationists or whoever, the anti-vaxxers and whatnot, they'll jump all over that. In fact, that was a point back in the 80s when I first got started in this business. The creationists were making a big deal about all the errors that biologists and paleontologists had made, dating certain fossils or misinterpreting a pig tooth for a human tooth, that kind of thing. But when you look into it, it turned out it was other scientists that debunked those claims. So it was actually a good example of science policing itself. And, it's a good example why we need to do that. We need to stay on top of our own claims, our own business, before outsiders who have reasons to be hostile toward science, like the smoking industry or the the climate deniers and so on. Those are the people that are going to jump all over the errors if we don't catch them.
Well, you bring up climate deniers, you bring up anti-vax and that sort of thing. That makes me think of a couple others that I would lump in that category. 9/11 truthers, flat earthers, moon landing deniers, all this kind of thing. Is it that these people are too skeptical that they don't even accept the stuff that we skeptics would accept? Like, is skepticism between a 0 and a 10, and you don't want to go past 5? Or are they not skeptical at all? Is this not like a linear thing, Yeah,
I like that. That's a good example. It depends on the claims. I'm fond of saying, are you skeptical of global warming, or are you skeptical of the global warming skeptics, which would make you a believer? And the answer is it depends on the claim. So skepticism isn't a thing where you start off just disbelieving everything no matter what. It depends on the quality of the evidence and the convergence of evidence in that particular area. So it all depends. I mean, it turns out I believe all sorts of things that I'm not skeptical of, like the Big Bang, the theory of evolution, the germ theory of disease, the plate tectonics. There's a lot of things that I accept because the evidence is so overwhelmingly strong, or there's a convergence amongst the leaders in that field that the evidence is strong, even if I don't understand the field, like quantum physics. I don't understand at all. But I can ask the people who do it for a living, and they'll tell me that, 97% of quantum physicists accept this finding. Okay, well, so that's the sort of thing that leads us to say, well, okay, so what is skepticism? Well, it's just a scientific way of thinking where you start off with the null hypothesis. That is, I'm skeptical of your claim until I see the evidence. But once the evidence is pretty overwhelming, then it's okay to drop your skepticism and say, yeah, I provisionally accept that as probably true, provisionally true, or whatever. There's no truth with a capital T in science, but at least we can provisionally agree that it's true. The theory of evolution is a fact, a fact in the sense that it's provisionally true, not 100%. And so there's scales of confidence that you assign to certain claims, some more than others. So there's a whole bunch of areas in between, like different theories of consciousness, for example, where, there's no agreement or very little agreement. So there we keep an open mind, be skeptical of different theories until, there's some experimental evidence for them, and then carry on.
You brought up consciousness a couple times, and I don't want to go here because it's, it's that one question that you think like, oh, don't hit him with that. But I got to ask you, because you talk about this a lot. I noticed you were on Joe Rogan Experience recently, and you guys talked about free will versus determinism. I don't know a better way to ask the question than just to blatantly ask, do we have free will?
Absolutely we do, and I have no choice but to accept that belief.
That's not fair, Mike.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm a compatibilist. There's different positions on this. The three basic positions are libertarian free will, not political libertarian, but what philosophers call libertarian free will, where you absolutely have total free will, and almost no philosophers believe that. Then there's very few. Then there's, determinism, just, every last twitch and thought and itch and laugh and everything we do is determined in the same way that a billiard ball, careening around a table is determined. And then there's compatibilists, which hold that that we do live in a determined universe where every effect has a cause and so on, all the way back to the Big Bang. But the choices we make are part of the causal net are still our choices. So the part of the problem is there's no good way to work around this because of the limitations of language and cognition. So when a compatibilist says I make choices, this is what I would argue and I'm pretty much reflecting Dan Dennett's much more thought out position that he wrote in his book Freedom Evolves, that we have degrees of freedom. That is, let's say I have more degrees of freedom than a chimp. A chimp has more than my dog, the dog more than the rat more than the cockroach, and so on. It has to do with behavioral complexity and the number of options you have at any given point when you're, say, just walking along, go left, right, 2 degrees to the center or whatever. That there's more degrees of freedom for more complex organisms, and we're the most complex. We have the most degrees of freedom. Now, all those things are still caused. There's still quantum effects and Newtonian mechanics at work in biology and genetics and all that. But still, the difference between, say, me and a drug addict has fewer degrees of freedom than I do because I'm not addicted to drugs. And so my behavioral repertoire is broader, wider. I have more choices I can make. And so in that sense, and also it's my brain, so it's me responsible for the choices I make because it's me making those choices, my brain, and the brain is a whole series of neural networks or modules. There's no self, but there's, part of my brain is overriding my impulses. Say I have an impulse to eat chocolate cake, but I have another part of my brain that says, no, Shermer, come on, you're trying to lose weight. Okay, all right. If I can get through the next hour and not have that chocolate cake, I'll be okay. And then I impose certain things I've learned in my life to control my behavior so I don't eat the chocolate cake. And so I can override my impulses. This is called free won't. And so there I think there's reasonable arguments to be made for compatibilism. And in any case, we feel like we have free will. We're very hypocritical about this. You feel like you have free will, but that I don't. And you treat me as if I'm a deterministic agent in the world, and I do the same thing. I feel like I'm free, but I treat other people in the world as if it's determined, and we all do this. So this is what the philosopher Hans Weiner called a useful fiction. It's a useful fiction to just assume we have free will because it feels like it. We are making choices, real choices that you can override in the world. And in any case, to have a civil society, we need to hold people accountable. And finally, I think psychology and the law have merged pretty well on these issues of allocating punishment in a Skinnerian behavioral adjustment way that we're trying to get people to change their behavior in a kind of a game matrix, like, let's say we're going to allocate certain punishments for certain behaviors. So like we have first degree murder, second degree murder, and so on. We make distinctions for people in crimes of passion or crimes of rage versus plotted out and intentional murder, or say the guy had a brain tumor. And so he couldn't control his rage, or that there's certain people with brain damage, like Adrian Rain's book, The Anatomy of Violence. And let's get that. I think that's what it's called, The Anatomy of Violence. He's the guy that scanned the brains of serial killers and found out that their prefrontal cortex is pretty shut down, pretty quiescent, largely non-functioning. So everybody has impulses that bubble up from underneath. And now most of us don't have impulses to just walk around killing people. But these people that when you look at their backgrounds, they have horrible backgrounds, and they've been, banged on the head, they have brain damage and so on, and the equivalent of a tumor, their prefrontal cortex that controls their urges is just not working. So don't let these people out, for God's sakes, but treat them in a way that it's more of a mechanical problem. Well, you and I don't have that problem. Our prefrontal cortex works pretty well, so you and I should be held accountable for not controlling our impulses as opposed to somebody else who can't control them. Still, don't let them out, lock them up, because we don't want them to cause mayhem to society. But instead of punishing them in a way like a theological system of of issuing punishments for sin, we should treat them as it's a behavioral problem that needs to be solved. So that's my take on that.
You said so much there, and I have no doubt that the listeners, even before I'm talking now, have already hit rewind to play a lot of that back, because that was a lot of information really fast, and I'm going to have to join them in that. I got to play a lot of that back myself later. On my end, I got focused on one thing that you just said, and I was hoping you could clarify. Did you just say there is no self?
Yeah, well, this is actually a big subject in both philosophy and now cognitive science. That the brain consists of a whole bunch of modules or neural networks, whatever metaphor you want to use, that evolved to solve certain problems. And it's not clear where the self is. We feel like a self. It may be something of an illusion, but it's a really good illusion if it is, because it certainly feels like I'm a self contained in a single body. I don't go so far as some people. Bruce Hood wrote a book, I think it was called The Illusion of the Self, in which he made this argument. And that's the argument. I don't go that far, but there's the idea that, like, where would free will be located? Well, it's not located in any one place. Well, where's the self? There is no self module in the brain. It's probably just the coordination of all neural networks at once. Michael Gazzaniga, the neuroscientist here at UC Santa Barbara, I'm up in Santa Barbara now, he talks about the left hemisphere interpreter. That is, there's a portion of your brain, your left cortex, that coordinates all the others into kind of a coherent narrative story that makes sense. Even though it's mostly just random firings and the brain's just doing whatever it's doing. But there's a part of your brain that coordinates it all to make sense. And so this is why we spin doctor things after the fact, the hindsight bias, for example. It's like, oh, that makes perfect sense the way it happened. Well, it really didn't. And you're just kind of spin doctoring a story so it's not just chaos out there. Right. But it could be the self is something like that. Something like a narrative storyteller that coordinates all the impulses that come into your brain and your thoughts that you have into some coherent story that isn't really real. That's the argument. That
was the equivalent of me asking you, Dr. Shermer, who am I? Who am I?
Yeah.
Who am I? But it feels like there is someone, and this is probably the worst way to characterize it possible, but it feels like there is someone behind my eyes viewing reality. I mean, would that be a fair description?
Yeah. That's absolutely, and it's true. Now, of course, it's a species-specific perceptual system that is, the famous story, what's it like to be a bat? The only way to find out would be to, plug in some sonar systems into your sensory apparatus and start pinging objects with sound and so on. Well, you still wouldn't know what it's like to be a bat unless you were actually a bat, in which case you wouldn't be asking the question. So it isn't actually possible to know. But for the most part, I think if we pull back and look at the bigger picture, when you're standing there in front of the mirror, yeah, it is you. There is a you there. Even if it's species specific and it's in reality isn't really real in the sense that every species sees a table or a chair or another person differently than you do. There's still something out there that really exists. We don't want to go so far as to be solipsists and say there is no reality. But on the other hand, it's good to be humble before the universe in that sense that, we have to be cautious about what we believe because it's easy to be fooled. Again, this TED Talk that I just watched yesterday, this Anil Seth, he has really good examples, sort of like I do in my TED Talks, of how optical illusions, he has a really great audio illusion similar to my Stairway to Heaven played backwards thing, where he plays this audio clip, you have no idea what it is. Then he tells you what it says, and he plays it back again, and you can hear the words perfectly. And it's like, oh, that's really cool. And that's an example of why we should be humble before the universe, modest in our conclusions, careful not to be too overly confident in our beliefs, because it is so easy to be fooled.
I loved that Stairway to Heaven thing you did. That was, and if any listeners aren't familiar with what we're talking about, It was his TED Talk. That was the same one. Why we believe weird things,
yes,
right? That we were referencing earlier. Yeah, it is hilarious. He plays it backwards and says, "What do you hear?" And you really don't hear anything. You might hear the word Satan a little bit, but if you're reading into it, you're trying to think of something dark anyway, right? And then 'cause the '80s satanic panic, a lot of this generation still remembers that. I know I grew up in it. Then he puts the words on the screen for you. And everything you're hearing lines up perfectly. And it's this like horrible stuff like, I met Satan behind the tool shed I can't remember exactly, but it was hilarious.
The tool shed. Yeah. Very dangerous place, that tool shed. Yeah.
Yeah. Something.
Well, so, and this, this is one of the things that, that people that believe in the paranormal, like electronic phenomenon, I heard in the static my loved one's voice or whatever, these things are happening in our brains. And, one of the best things I've done to understand the brain is read Oliver Sacks's books. He's really good because he shows that the patients he dealt with, he was a neurologist, the patients he dealt with, their distorted reality wasn't distorted at all. It was their reality. Absolutely. They heard voices, they heard music, they heard this or that, they saw this or that that you and I would not have seen because it wasn't really there in the external world. But in their brains, it is just as real as you and I hearing each other's voices right now. And he shows how that happens, to the extent that we know how it happens, certain areas of the brain, like the fusiform gyrus and the temporal lobes. There's this one little spot just above your and behind your ears that's allocated toward facial recognition. It sort of maps on to recognizing eyes and nose and mouth and constructs a face there. And when there's damage to that area from tumors or strokes or whatever, people have these fantastic hallucinations of faces, like huge teeth or giant eyes, or they see faces that are not there, or they're face blind. They can't recognize somebody's face, even their own, in a mirror. And, it's pretty spooky when you read this because people that have paranormal experiences, these anomalous psychological experiences, they interpret in a paranormal way. I always point them to Oliver Sacks's books. It's like these people had the same kind of experience that you had, but we know that the problem was right there in that part of the brain. So that's where it is. And, but mine was really real. It's like, I know. And the people that had these hallucinations also thought that. And Oliver also talks in his autobiography that he published just before he died about all the drugs he took in the 60s. And, it was the 60s. So,
of course.
And then he writes about his hallucinations and how vivid and the colors and how real it was for him. So when I read Eben Alexander's book, Proof of Heaven, about his trip to heaven with all the butterflies and the beautiful woman and the colors and the sounds and all that, to me, it sounds just like a Oliver Sacks acid trip, or any of those kinds of hallucinations that people have. But to Eben Alexander, it was, really a trip to heaven to the point where he wrote a book about it. And, but to me, to an outsider, what's the difference between these two? And the answer is none. It's all in the brain.
I'm struggling here. Okay. Bear with me. I'm trying to work something out while I'm talking to you. Okay. Anytime someone asks me about free will, I typically line up with the Dan Dennett compatibilism, just like you yourself. If you catch me 9 p.m. on a Saturday night, I got a 12-year-old scotch in my hand and a cigar, and you say, what do you really think? And you catch me at my most transparent, my most legitimate, humble moment where I don't feel like Robert's got to have the answers. That's what we all do in life. We got answers. We act like we know what's really going on, right? We all play this game. You catch me in that moment, I'm going to look at you and I'm going to say, you know what? Compatibilism, this thing that I'm hanging on to, it's nothing more than determinism while still trying to just redefine the term of free will. Is that just super insecurity, or am I close to something here?
No, I think that reflects the impossibility of solving the problem because, as I mentioned, these linguistic and cognitive restrictions we have on the words themselves. I find a useful thing. I found a survey done a few years ago of every PhD philosopher in America, either a professor or graduate student. It was like 3,400 of them or something. And they asked them, what is your opinion on X? And there was like 20 different major issues in philosophy that philosophers talk about. And one of them was free will determinism. And it came out something like, I think it was 61% are compatibilists and 34% are determinists, and some small percent were libertarian free will. Anyway, I'm not getting the numbers right, but that's roughly correct. So,
right.
The fact that the people trained to think about these issues at the deepest level are not in agreement at all. And it's been this way for thousands of years, since Plato and Aristotle first wrote about these things.
That is terrifying.
Yeah, well, to me, it reflects that it's an insoluble problem. That there's something else going on. That it's restricted by how we talk about it, the words we use, our cognition. There's a group called Mysterians. The Mysterians believe there's certain mysteries that will never be solved, simply because our brains aren't big enough, or our brains are wired in a way that we can't understand certain things. And there may be some truth to that. Like asking what was there before time began, or before the Big Bang. Well, you can't even. It's like asking what's north of north, the North Pole. There is no north of the North Pole. It's a peculiar question to ask. Or the problem of nothing. What does it mean for there to be nothing? You can't even really conceive of it, because the fact that someone's even asking means there's not nothing. And nothing, no thing. Well, there's a thing that there is none of, which means there must be some category of thingness that's empty. But there's a category. That's something. And at some point you hit an epistemological wall that you just can't get past. You can't get around. And I find many of these philosophical debates to kind of end like this. You just hit a wall, and then there's no place to go, because we have to talk and we have to use words to communicate, and the words themselves are restricting. Like if you have free will, how can the world be determined? But we know the universe is determined. Then you mean I don't have free will, but I sure feel like I make choices, and round and round you go. And I think at some point you just go, let's talk about something else, because you can't.
So then it sounds like I was close then, that compatibilism is almost the most reasonable way of giving up on it.
I think everybody is a compatibilist. All those people that say they believe in determinism, I think they're really compatibilists in the behavioral sense of how they live their lives. They don't actually walk around thinking the whole universe is determined, so it doesn't matter if I look left or right when I cross the street, or it doesn't matter if I behave in a moral or immoral way because I have no choices. No. They absolutely act as if they're making choices at every moment of their lives. They're compatibilists. And to those determinists who say, well, the compatibilists just haven't thought it through carefully enough. Really? Dan Dennett, the great Dan Dennett, has not thought this through carefully? Are you kidding me? I mean, come on.
Well,
and not just him, but lots of people like him.
My issue with determinism, strict determinism or strong determinism, is that the way that they make the argument, I would not accept that form of argument in any other form. Now, I can't object to what they're saying, but they'll say something like, well, you could have looked left, or to use your analogy, you could have looked left or right on the street, but you looked left and you didn't have any other choice. But they're making that claim after the fact. And I said, well, there's no way to dispute that because you're looking at it backwards. And I wouldn't accept that my skepticism alarm would go off, and every other claim, whether it be religious or economics or sociology or, whatever it is, every other area other than philosophy, I don't accept this. So why do I accept it in philosophy?
Yeah, that's right. Yep. I talk about this in I have a whole chapter in the Moral Arc on free will and determinism. So, and I use an example there, that everybody uses, but Adrian Rain made famous of Mr. Oft, O-F-T. It's this middle-aged school teacher who all of a sudden he was inappropriate with his stepdaughter, and his wife caught him and turned him in, and then they found kiddie porn on his computer, and he's in big trouble, and off to jail he's about to go after a psychiatric evaluation, where they discovered that he's got a tumor in his brain pressing up. I think it was in the hypothalamus somewhere. And it's like, oh, he's got a tumor. So they took the tumor out. He no longer had any of these inappropriate impulses and urges. And he, back to teaching, back at home with his wife and stepdaughter. Everything's fine until 6 months later, the wife finds kitty porn on his computer again. Boom, back to the brain scanner, tumor's growing back. And so, now Rain makes the point, what's the difference between a pedophile who doesn't have a tumor, but there's something in his brain that's obviously different than most of us who don't have those impulses, but there's no tumor. Now, for Mr. Ocht, orbital frontal cortex is, anyway, that's what we call Mr. Ocht because they don't give his name. But so what's the difference between having a tumor and just having a weirdly wired brain? His point is there's no difference. And that's true. It's in a way, having a background that we just don't know about, how you were raised, your genetics, your, in the womb, biochemistry, whatever was going on in there, wired your brain, certain hormones, and so on. That's all just as determining as that tumor is. But still, I think the law here again deals with this in a way. Okay, so he had a tumor, so he wasn't really in control of his impulses, but if you and I ever have these kinds of impulses, but we don't act on it because we have a prefrontal cortex that pushes the urge down and stops that, then we are accountable in that sense.
So I hate to just change strides here, but I'm very fascinated with what you're talking about. But here I have Michael Shermer from Skeptic Magazine, right? And I've got to ask you this question because it keeps coming up again and again and again. I don't feel like we've had James Lindsay on the show already. We've had lots of people talking about his article, This Conceptual Penis, which was in your magazine. A lot of angry atheists out there, right? And I don't feel like this situation is going to come full circle and get resolved until I ask Dr. Michael Shermer about it.
Please.
So here's just a just quick, simple one. What did it prove?
What it proved? Okay, first of all, we didn't publish the article. We published the expose of the article. The article is, of course, published in a journal called Cogent Social Sciences, which is not...
Yeah, fair point.
Yeah, which is not, by the way, a pay-for-play journal. It's actually a real journal, really a real peer-reviewed journal. It's not a gender studies journal. It's a general social science journal. And as Pete points out in his follow-up article for us, it has a 61% rejection rate. So obviously they reject lots of people, and Pete and James, they never did pay. The whole money thing was quite secondary. What does it prove? Well, to me, the whole, which journal was it is irrelevant. To me, it wouldn't have mattered if it was in the Onion. The point was that if you can't tell the difference between a so-called real journal and article and a fake one, then what's really going on in that particular field? And the example I used more recently is the Feminist Glacier article, which is a real article. I remember when that came out last year, I thought, oh, come on, this is one of these hoaxes. This is before Pete and James did their hoax. So I thought, oh, this is an Alan Sokol hoax for sure.
Wait, what was it called?
Oh, a feminist glaciology. That glaciers are, the study of glaciers has been done by mostly, white males throughout history. And,
oh my God.
And that hard ice is very patriarchal, and so forth. Yeah, I know. That was my initial reaction.
They point up like a phallic kind of symbol.
Yes, something like that. And since then, the professor there, one of the co-authors of the paper, gave a TED talk. It's a TEDx talk. I forget which one, but you can find it on TED somewhere. And it's totally real. She's absolutely has a pretty good talk, actually. It's a pretty cogent talk about making the case for this argument. Now to me, it's just all nonsense. But, maybe I'm just out of my element here. But I can't tell the difference between the conceptual penis argument and the feminist glacier argument. And so if you can't tell the difference, then what's really going on? And to me, that was the point of the Sokol hoax back in 95, I think it was, when Alan Sokol published his hoax. And at the time, everybody was pretty outraged about it and angry at him for doing it. And now he's kind of held up as a champion of clear thinking and why we need to be careful about our language and so on. And everyone seems to like him now. But at the time, that was not the case at all. People were pretty critical of him. So I think this too shall pass. I think there is a role for this, not too often. We're not going to do anything like this again. I mean, it was sort of a one-off event. I think it made its point. What is the point? I think clear thinking, clear reasoning, and the abuse of language, I think is a problem in the social sciences and in some of these areas where, there's a search for, let's say a search for demons or a search for witches, to use an analogy. And you'll find them, that look the way this person used this word. Obviously they're patriarchal or they're misogynistic or whatever. Maybe the cigar is just a cigar. Maybe there's nothing there. And in other places, language does matter. Like, the use of the N-word, I would agree. That's not the PC police going too far. I mean, there's certain things we shouldn't say, because they're hurtful. So there's a spectrum there between, using the N-word on one end and say conceptual penis or feminist glaciology on the other end of how we talk about things. And so I think a hoax like that just kind of is a small corrective or alert to where our thinking may have gone too far.
Yeah, and when we had Dr. Lindsay on the show, and the co-author or primary author of the article, along with Peter Boghossian, he and I, we just had a good time. We just laughed about it for most of the interview, and I think that's one thing that a lot of folks out there that are upset about this article, I think they're missing that it was funny. And I guarantee you, everybody that read that, the first time they read it, before they went, wait a minute, is this person attacking transgender people in a way, or is this person anti-feminist? Before they did that, they laughed their ass off, every damn one of them. And I think it was funny, and I think criticizing something is important, but I think we would get the same pushback if you did the same kind of article about African-American culture, for instance. And I don't think that that's because people that care about African-American culture are against people that would criticize it. And I don't think it's because, in reference to the conceptual penis, that people that care about misogyny and that sort of thing are against James Lindsay or against Boghossian or against, Skeptic Magazine or something like that. I think it's just because there's certain topics that are kind of sensitive, and whenever we see some pushback against progressiveness, against this movement that we all care about, we're all trying to work toward this. Everybody on the free thinking and humanist spectrum, atheist spectrum, liberalism, that sort of thing, we're all trying to work toward this goal. And I think maybe what they see this as sometimes, whenever they get something like this that comes up, like you said, this will pass too, or this too shall pass, and there's been stuff in the past like so-called and all that. I think whenever this happens, they see it as a threat against our mission.
Yes, that's exactly right. And after the conceptual penis thing came out, then the incident at Evergreen happened with Brett Weinstein being accused of being a racist, which is absolutely not true. He's the very opposite of a racist. So this to me was an example of a movement gone too far. If you're searching for demons, you're trying to find witches. The analogy doesn't quite hold, because there really are racists and bigots and misogynists out there, for sure. And there are no witches or demons. But the idea is that if you're seeing things, if you're looking for them so hard, you might find them where they don't actually exist, in the very people who would otherwise be supporting your cause, like Brett Weinstein.
Yes. What is that? Why are we fighting amongst ourselves so much right now? Isn't that wild?
Yes, it is wild. Well, there's a couple things going on there. I think there's all social movements go through this. My partner at Skeptic Magazine, Pat Lindsay, she's a little older than me, and so she went through the second wave feminist movement in the 60s and early 70s, and saw it also splinter apart. Like, who was the real feminist? Who was the true feminist? And then there were purges. Like, you're not a real feminist because you watched this movie, or you voted for this candidate, or you like this kind of food, or whatever. And it just became these preemptive denunciations of people, as the term is called, preemptive denunciation. You denounce others before they denounce you, and it ends up being like a witch hunt, a purge, like the old communist purges. This is why Stalin had Trotsky murdered. Trotsky is a hardcore communist, but the wrong kind of communist. So he had to be killed. It really does get down to that with these social movements. And on the other side of the political spectrum, Ayn Rand's objectivist movement also fell apart in the late 70s when she started purging people who were not true objectivists. You don't like the right kind of cigarettes, or you listen to the wrong kind of music. It's not true objectivist music. Out you go. And when she died in 1982, there was like 6 people at her funeral or something. She had no friends, no supporters. I should say a lot of people liked her books, but no one in her circle, because she kicked them all out for being, impure. And I think the atheist movement has gone through this. Who's the real atheist? Are you a true atheist? What does that even mean? It's like, I didn't believe in God once this whole year. I'm really pure. It's no, you have the wrong, you're a progressives purging themselves, leftists purging each other. All social movements go through this. It's really unfortunate because, we need to circle the wagons and stick together, because there's plenty of, real problems to be addressed. And, I'm worried about this because it does hurt our cause. And I've tracked moral progress in the moral arc, and things really are better. But, if you think things are bad and getting worse and they've never been so bad, you're going to lose adherents who would otherwise support your cause, because they see you're just taking it too far. You're finding demons where none exist. And Brett Weinstein, this guy could not be a greater champion against racism and bigotry and so on. And here he is, run out of town for daring to not participate in one little activity on campus. That's, to me, that was the climax. That pretty much showed the problem for what it is.
Your perspective of this is actually kind of comforting, because you're saying, take a step back, everybody, chill out, calm down. This is something historically that repeats itself again and again and again. Don't worry about it. We're naturally tribalistic. But I got to ask you, if this is something that repeats itself, what's the next step that we can expect? Where are we going to end up as a community? Is this going to turn out okay?
I think so. I think these corrections happen after they go too far. So you end up with like a hoax or something like a big media event surrounding the Evergreen incident. It was, Fox News that covered it, Tucker Carlson that covered it, for God's sakes. And, now people on the left are outraged about that. It's like, yeah, well, where was the New York Times? How come they didn't cover? Now they are. Okay. So I think the pendulum starts to swing back and people chill out. But
Dr. Shermer, we've got Trump. Things are getting worse, right? Come on.
Yeah. I think, again, I'm blindly optimistic. I don't know. I think this too shall pass. I think it'll be a good test to show that our democratic system is set up with enough checks and balances to prevent catastrophe from happening. I hope.
Yeah.
This is probably the most extreme case we've ever had that will test the Constitution and the law. But again, Nixon, he did some pretty crazy stuff during the Watergate thing, and the Constitution, the law, the Supreme Court, they stood up to him. And I think the media has been, all over Trump, and not all the media, but enough that, and the Supreme Court has stood up to him on a number of times already. And his own party, the Republican Party, there plenty of them are very critical of him. He can't get the Obamacare, that he wants to, repeal and replace it. He can't do it. He can't do it. His own people are standing up to him. So to me, it's a good sign that the system's working. Even an extreme crazy person, can't bring down the system.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
Nothing inevitable. It's not that we're destined to always succeed. It's just that the system is set up in a way to keep it going, I think.
Yeah. And I like the positive viewpoint that you have. And it reminds me of saying that as bad as things get, they come back just as strong or even stronger. The deeper the trough, the higher the crest. And I think that one thing that we might look at and go, yeah, this is a tough time for everybody, but whatever this force returns, it's going to come back strong, and that's when we gotta kind of team up and stop fighting amongst ourselves. Hey, before I let you go, I know you're a busy guy. Heavens on Earth. What should we expect with that?
Oh, yeah. I'm very excited about this. I just got the cover in, and it'll be out January 9th. The subtitle explains what the book is about. So it's Heavens on Earth, the scientific search for the afterlife, immortality, and utopia. So the main focus of the book is, of course, I deal with all the different religious versions of heaven and the afterlife and immortality. But the crux of it is that of all the attempts of scientists to achieve immortality, that is, cryonics, radical life extension, the transhumanists, the mind uploaders, the singularitarians, the omega point theorists, all these people that are, like re-engineering the genome and cells so we can live forever. There's a lot of people working on this, and not just on the fringes, not just the crazies, or science fiction scenarios. But, Google has invested a lot of money. There's a lot of startup companies and venture capitalists investing in these companies working on aging problems.
Really?
Basically,
this is going on right now?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yep. Basically billionaire baby boomers who see the wall is coming
Wow.
and they're trying to do something about it. Oh, yeah. And so I'm skeptical of all these claims. I'm quite confident it's not going to happen, certainly in my lifetime, and probably not for centuries, if ever. Mainly because there's so many different systems at work in the human body that's so complex that all start to deteriorate at the same time, that there's no magic bullet. Ray Kurzweil, the singularity is near guy, he works for Google now. He's head of their engineering department, and he's working on part of his job is working on their anti-aging program. Google is, it's a pretty rich company. They've invested a lot of money, many hundreds of millions, into solving the aging problem. They're treating it like an engineering problem. It's there's certain things that happen in the cells that cause them to age. And so what can we do about that? And just treat it like it's an engineering problem. I like that approach, and I'm glad somebody's working on it. But again, like with AI, I think it's a much harder problem than anybody realized at the beginning. And it's going to take a long time. And in this case, it may never happen. And, when my interlocutors say, Shermer, don't you want to live to be 500 years, 1,000 years? And it's like, look, just get me to 90 without cancer.
Right.
Get me to 100 without Alzheimer's. If you can get me to 120 where I'm not bedridden with tubes in a hospital, I would be thrilled. Let's just take it one step at a time. Just solve the problems one at a time. Alzheimer's would be a huge one. I'm a baby boomer, and we're all starting to get into that where this is happening. It's going to be a huge problem, Alzheimer's. And so don't worry about living 10,000 years. Worry about next year. Let's just solve that one problem. Cancer. Turns out it's a much, much harder problem. There is no such thing as cancer, like it's one thing. There's 100 different cancers, or even within one kind of cancer, uterine cancer, breast cancer, prostate cancer. There's a bunch of different kinds, even within each of those. It's a hard problem. So, and then finally, I deal with the attempts to create heavens on earth, actual utopias, and why they always fail. Most of them have a flawed theory of human nature, that if we can only engineer society in this particular way with these 6 different things, then everyone will be happy forever. And it never works out because people differ so much, and our natures are such that there is no one society that's perfect. It's not possible to do that. And then the last chapter, I deal with the problems that you and I have, that lots of us atheists have to deal with. Well, if there is no God, there is no heaven, then what? What's the purpose of life? Why does it matter? So I try to answer that in my own way. So that's coming out January 9th.
Oh, just from those points that you went over on the book, there's so much I want to talk to you about, but I know you're a busy guy. Can we save that for next time?
Yeah, we can do it again in January when the book comes out.
I would love to talk to you again about that, because I'm going crazy right now when I ask you stuff, but I got to let you go. I got to let you get back to work. Thank you so much for your time today, and I really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome, Robert, and I'll have my publicist send you a copy of the book when it's ready, and we'll have another conversation.
Awesome. Is there a good source for people to learn more about you? I'm sure there's not just one, but ways to contribute or find your book and things like that?
Yeah, just michaelshermer.com or skeptic.com is the best place to find me. And of course, my books are on Amazon and audio books. I read all my own audiobooks. Those are on iTunes and audible.com. So that's the best place.
Heavens on Earth, the scientific source for the afterlife, immortality, and utopia. We've just been talking to Dr. Michael Shermer. Thank you for your time and have a great day.
You're welcome. Thanks.
That was incredible. Michael Shermer was great. I can't wait to read his new book and have my mind blown. If you enjoyed today's show and feel our broadcast has value, you can help. Please visit patreon.com/right. That's RIGHT. I want to thank the Odd Atheist friends for their recent patron support. If you haven't heard their show, you should really check it out. It's a fantastic podcast, very funny, and they dig into some difficult and interesting topics. Eric Ryder and Matthew Maxson, thank you so much. Once again, if you want to help get our message out to the marketplace of ideas, visit patreon.com/right. If you've been enjoying the music this episode, you can hear more by visiting aloststateofmind.com. That page is full of Jason Comeau's talent. Next week, we have another debate for you. And this one is the hardest debater I have ever had. A little nervous. Blake Junta will be here joining us, and he's insanely good at this stuff. You may have heard him go up against Matt Dillahunty in the past. If I have any religious listeners out there, pray for me, guys. Blake Junta next week. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast if you haven't already done so. That way you can hear our brain battle and what's about to go down. Remember to tune in for that. Between now and then, there's another thing you should remember. You have the right to reason.